The magicka, its power was easy to guess. Precisely because it was simple, its speed was excellent. And since its effect was purely physical, it was easy to understand. Snap. As if a transparent bomb had triggered a transparent explosion, a shockwave burst forth right at Felminia's feet. It was so close that she only managed to evade it by a hair when she rolled away. Ugh, ah. As if blocking off her path of retreat, Swimai snapped his fingers once more. Felminia seemed to sense the impending danger and changed her course. She ran for dear life from the shockwaves, evading left and right almost like a dance. Unhappy with this turn of events, she screamed at Swimai, "This is absurd. How can you just continuously fire off magic so easily? Ha! You're a third-rate magician precisely because you can't do it. Did you think that I was going to shoot once and let you have another go at me? We're not playing an RPG here, you know?" That's right. This was no game. It was a competition with their lives at risk. Swimai came from a world where a single second's hesitation could bring a merciless end to things. It was incomparable to the mysteries Felminia knew. While Felminia was scurrying about trying to dodge his attacks, Swimai pulled a reagent vial from his pocket and opened it quickly. Inside was mercury, the only metal in the world which was naturally a liquid at room temperature. Alchemists nicknamed it quicksilver, but when magicka was cast on it, that name took on its true meaning. With great force, Swimai swept his arm from left to right as if to scatter the contents of the vial, then focused on the mercury that was waiting for him in a line in midair. Permutato, coagulato, vis existito. Transform, coagulate, become power. Grabbing the mercury while it was still in a liquid state, he swung it back as if flicking blood off of a katana. By the time he followed through on the swing, the mercury had taken shape. Since he'd been using it like a sword, it naturally imitated that shape. That was what he'd intended. What he held was a weapon, a mercury katana. Using magicka, he could give it any shape. It was a weapon with no form, a mercurial arm. O earth! Turn thy body into obstinate stone and smash my enemy. Stone raid. The moment before Swimai's mercury solidified, Felminia completed her magicka. She called out to the earth, and small stones took shape and flew at Swimai along planned trajectories. Just before they reached him, they finished tapering to sharp points and became vicious projectiles. Too naive. Swimai cleared the incoming stones out of the air with his newly formed sword. Not even a bullet could get past a trained magician's eye. Flying rocks posed no threat. Swimai's blade smashed through one stone fired off with mana after another. The flow of his swordsmanship was elegant. He was unfazed, his face never revealing even a single hint of panic. You can use a sword even as a mage? Is there something wrong with that? Close combat techniques are essential to magicians where I come from, I'll have you know. But whether up close and personal or at a distance, it isn't a hindrance to using magicka though. Shit. Shit. Felminia began to fire off stones blindly in an act of desperation. But they would never hit Swimai. Not even a speck of sand would reach his coat. As he cut down the last rock, it shattered into crumbling lumps of earth. They could no longer maintain their form. O fire! Become my will to pierce through and permutato, fluctuato, acutum flagellum exorcistito. Transform, flow, become a sharp whip. Swimai and Felminia started their chants at the same time, but his was shorter and he finished sooner. The thought that longer chants were better was old-fashioned. Chants were meant to be short, and they were far more functional that way. It was smart to only pull power from words with meaning. By trimming away the excess, word for word, and thoroughly considering the vocabulary used for every single verse, the chant would eventually become faster. The answer was obvious and clear. And with Swimai's expedient chant, a magicka circle formed centered on his mercury katana like the sword was piercing through it. Swimai then deftly flicked his wrist. The mercury, which was in the shape of a sharp and stiff blade, then transformed into a whip like a leather cord. Just like his chant implied, he now had a mercury whip that flowed freely through the air. He used it to lash at the ground by Felminia's feet and interrupt her chant. Huh? The mercury whip surpassed the speed of sound, and a violent boom rang out like a gun firing a blank. The ground where it struck was deeply gouged. The metal whip possessed destructive power that far surpassed one made of leather. Its weight, its hardness, its sharpness, and even its length were free for Suimai to control. It could penetrate iron plating like it was paper, so the effect it would have on flesh and bone need not be said. Its destructive power could be glimpsed just by looking at what it had done to the ground. Ugh! This can't be. With a single swing of his arm, Suimai could reap her life. Staring down that cold realization, Felminia was frozen. She couldn't take a single step from where she stood, and her lips simply refused to chant anymore. She could hardly articulate herself, but the mortified look on her face said it all. Suimai could see her grow pale. He knew this was the end game, but he couldn't stop yet. The curtain wouldn't fall until his opponent was on their knees. If she was merely mortified, then she had not yet given up. She was still wondering how to recover, still looking for an opening. And until all such thoughts were purged from her mind, Suimai wouldn't relent. He would carve utter defeat in the depths of her heart. With that intent, Suimai fed his passion to his mana furnace like kindling, and his mana suddenly exploded. With a roar that sounded like an earthquake, the whole castle shook. The erupting torrent of Suimai's excited mana unleashed a surge of ultramarine light with a thunderous cry like a dragon. And right before Suimai's eyes, Felminia lost the ability to even tremble in the face of his true identity. Seeing the truly overwhelming difference between them, she fell to her knees in a daze and simply stared up at him in awe. Suimai then sang out another chant. Intra velum, noctis lacrimarum potestas. Beneath the curtain, the majesty of the tears shed by the night. At his feet, an enormous magicka circle expanded to cover the entire garden. It shone with an ultramarine light made of mana that was deeper than even the hue of the starry sky. Its remarkable brilliance was dazzlingly bright, and the illusionary world they were in grew even more fantastical. Insigni Olympus et terrae pingito, colored by the symbol of heaven and earth. With every verse of his chant, something new happened. This spell was not built up all at once, unlike the magicka of this world that required an entire recitation to manifest. Each line of this chant was an embodiment of power. With each line, the world was changing, already transitioning toward the mystery that would occur. Like fireflies dotting the air, golden particles of power rose from the earth and soared heavenward as they were sucked in by the vast emptiness of the starry sky. Infestato ad irrationabilis veritas. Infest towards the irrational truth. Next, a massive magicka circle appeared directly overhead and covered everything below. As if projecting the stars that lit up the sky, countless smaller magicka circles took shape within it. Sikitu, pluvia incessibilis. Dazzle, incessant rain. The magicka circle which covered the heavens was categorized as a wide area expansion type. Its attribute was the void, modeled after ether. Its system was a combination of Kabbalah numerology and astrology. It was a fusion of styles, which could be said to be the representative style of modern magicka. All that was left was the final verse. A bold grin crept across Suimai's lips as he pronounced her execution. Court Mage Dono. Get ready to defend with everything you've got. Felminia didn't even protest. She deployed her best defensive magic as she clung to dear life. And then. Nth Astral. O starry sky, fall. With those keywords as a signal, pillars of light shot down from every single magicka circle covering the starry sky. Those countless pillars of mana and starlight held directionality, and came down like a rain of meteoric tears. All sound above ground was blown away by the thunderous roar of the Grim Reaper's approach. Death bared its fangs at all the earth within its range in a magnificent spectacle. Those rays, which looked like they could consign even enormous beasts to oblivion with a single strike, hailed incessantly from the countless magicka circles overhead. Everything directly below naturally had no way to defend against such destruction, and the ground rumbled like it was letting out a death knell as it crumbled under the merciless light. This was the star magicka starfall. Using the power of the stars themselves and the dormant seed of power sleeping within humans, it manifested in concert with the words left behind by Pericles, Nth Astral. It was one of Yakagi Suimai's grand magickas. Eventually, the rain of stars calmed down. And all that was left, as if that destructive scene was nothing but a dream, was the original Garden of the White Wall in complete tranquility, Yakagi Suimai wearing his black suit, and Felminia in her pure white robe, reduced to such tatters it could be mistaken for rags. No way. The first one to speak was Felminia. She was still on her knees, completely devoid of her usual dignity and unable to move as Suimai held his mercury katana to the nape of her neck. "I'm calling this my win. Any objections?" As he inquired about his victory, a trembling voice came back to him. Are you a damn monster? Just whose mouth was spouting bullshit about how they couldn't fight? Why did you refuse to take part in the Demon Lord's subjugation? If you went, even that damn Demon Lord could be defeated. That's bullshit and you know it. I said it back in the audience chamber, but fights are about numbers. History has proven that much. No matter how strong the individual, they cannot win against overwhelming numbers. There is no precedent for a single person attaining victory. Even if someone's remarkable, talented, and tough, they'll still drown in a sea of violence big enough. An individual is no match against the united will of many. Suimai felt like he had made his point, but he didn't stop there. You're not just asking us to defeat the demon lord you call Nakshatra or something, right? There are the legions of demons under this guy. That barcode Baldy said that the army that toppled the country called Noshias or whatever numbered in the millions, but just think about it, surely that wasn't their whole force. If they gathered their reserve soldiers, who knows how much bigger it could be? Is it double? Triple? How were you going to suggest I take on 1 million demons, much less 3? Even with a solid plan to take out a few elite demons to turn the tables and shake up morale, there's no guarantee you'd even make it through the rabble. No matter what you do, you can't fucking beat that. What the hell are you talking about? It is said that battle is where one's individual valor means everything. With that much power, our victory would be certain and defeat would be impossible. Are you an idiot? I'm saying that quantity and quality are in different categories when it comes to war. There's no way that quality equals quantity, right? You bastard of A. How could a man of your strength say such a cowardly thing? What? Me? Stop it. I'm no first-rate magician. Well, I've been told I've got a bit of talent, but back home, I'm only a magician in about the lower middle class at best. I guess you're right in that if we actually had the best of the best here, they might be able to do it with one hand tied behind their back, sure. But that kind of talk doesn't have a single iota of relevance to what we're talking about. Felminia was unable to say anything. Whether it was because she was terrified of the people of Suimai's world, or of him as he laughed and bragged about them wasn't entirely clear. But nevertheless, her speechlessness only reasserted the difference in power between them. Well, I knew it before we started, but the magicka here is pretty outdated, huh? Frankly speaking, this wasn't even all that fun. Granted, that may be a bit harsh to you. Suimai spoke honestly. The joy of witnessing mysteries not known to him and working out techniques to deal with them, giving birth to new magicka. That was what Suimai desired from battle as a magician. He'd gotten none of that out of the fight just now. There was nothing surprising, unexpected, or praiseworthy in what had just transpired. Suimai's victory was inevitable, negating all pleasure he should have taken in winning. All he'd gotten out of it was throwing it in Felminia's face. All right then, it's about time we bring the curtain down on this stage, mage. Suimai took a tone so cruel that it would send shivers down the spine of anyone who heard it. He froze his heart. His gaze was sub-zero. He was ready to end this. Felmenia was on her knees and wasn't trying to stand back up. This was it for her. As if she was facing the end of the world all on her own, her face was pale as a sheet. Are you going to kill me? I wonder. How do you think I'll bring this score to an end? Ema court mage. Oh, so if you're a court mage, then it's no biggie. Whenever Felmenia asserted her title, it was an attempt to stoke her bravery and steel herself, but her nerves failed her here. With Suimai's mercury katana to her throat, she could no longer pretend to be bold. RNGH. Hearing the fear overcome Felmenia, Suimai showered her with rebuke. Don't fucking seize up with fear this late into it, you damn good for nothing. All I did was answer your request in kind. Silence. You're the bastard who? To His Majesty. What about the king? When he sharply questioned her, Felmenia's tone wavered. Why did that come up all of a sudden? Did King Ormadius have anything to do with their quarrel? You were planning to harm His Majesty the King. What? Are we just making up excuses now? Just when, exactly, was I going to hurt your good-natured king? I don't have a single reason to do that kind of crap, do I? Huh? But you. Humph. I've had enough of your shit. Dash. When Suimai viciously cut her off, a shiver ran down Felmenia's spine. And then, scoffing with a cold stare, he asked her a grim question. A magician is always prepared to pay for their actions with their body, isn't that right, court mage? A magician must head into all things prepared for the consequences. In the world Suimai came from, that was common knowledge. But the young Felmenia had no such resolve. Please. Anything but that. Felmenia cast her pride to the wind and fell prostrate before Suimai. She silently pleaded for him to spare her and show mercy without a care for her appearance. She would have even sworn never to defy him again. But Suimai was unamused. He scoffed and began to mean-spiritedly interrogate her. Hey now. You couldn't wait to knock me off, but now you're begging for me to go easy on you? Why, you're wrong. I never had any intention of killing you. I just wanted to chastise you a little. Felmenia shook her head vigorously to the sides, and Suimai threw a suspicious gaze over her like a wet blanket. Even though she had nothing to stake her life on, her lack of resolve was pitiful. She had the backbone to try and take out her opponent, but clearly hadn't considered what the worst-case scenario might be like for her. Suimai considered this her punishment. He recalled hearing that she was some important noble, and for better or worse, that seemed to have had an effect on her personality. But putting that aside, Suimai went back to interrogating her. Is it true that you had no intent to kill me? It is. I swear to the goddess Ulshuna, I'm not lying. I don't know what her name means to you people, but as a Japanese person from another world, it means nothing to me. Suimai adjusted the katana, and it chinked as though it had a guard on it. Since Felmenia wasn't Japanese, she likely didn't know what that sound signified, but she instinctively seemed to sense she was that much closer to losing her life. She then resorted to sorrowful supplication. Please. I don't want to die yet. I don't want to die. Please. Anyone would have been able to see he'd bullied her too much. But now that she was this much of a mess, Suimai thought it was about time to move on to the main subject. Maintaining the malicious act, he began speaking in a decidedly bored tone. Then let's see. In exchange for sparing you, shall I have you accept my conditions? See conditions? That's right. First, you will never speak of what has happened here tonight to anyone. Second, you will never tell anyone that I am a magician. Especially not Reiji or Mizuki. Got it? As Suimai pressed her for consent, Felmenia shook her head from side to side with all her might as she trembled in fear. No, please wait. Reiji Dono and Mizuki Dono is one thing, but I have already informed His Majesty that you're a mage. In that case, what do I? How unexpected. I'm surprised someone as overconfident as you would have bothered talking to someone about it. I thought you would deem someone like me to be insignificant, and being sure that you could deal with me at any time on your own, wouldn't even set up any insurance in the event that you lost against me. Well, I don't really mind that much. In any case, you must never speak of the details of this encounter to anyone ever." Dodging the bullet of having violated his request before he'd ever even asked it, Felminia let out a sigh of relief. Suimai then moved on to the final and most important condition. "And third, based on the 2 previous conditions, I'll have you sign this document." With a gesture like he was reaching into thin air, a single piece of paper and a pen appeared in Suimai's left hand. The pen was the one he always used, and the paper had some sort of agreement written out on it in a foreign language. Naturally, Felminia couldn't understand any of it. "What is that?" "It's nothing. Just a contract. It says that you will absolutely keep your word if you agree to these conditions. A binding agreement, if you will. You don't mind just signing something like this, right?" "Understood. I will sign it." Felminia seemed to find it just a little suspicious, but she was quick to agree to it. She hardly knew what to make of this strange document presented to her, but considering the duress she was under, she hardly had a choice about signing it. After writing her name, she sealed it with a thumbprint in blood. After overseeing this, Suimai shamelessly informed her of what it all meant. "Also, I forgot to mention this, but now that you've signed this, in the event that you break your promise, you'll die." What? "Humph, you were probably planning on just spilling everything to the king after this, so this was a little insurance to keep that from happening, you know? I also don't want things to get complicated by having you make some kind of weird report to anyone." "Wait, there's no way that you can do something like that with just..." To a magician, a master of manipulating the mysteries of the universe, nothing is impossible. It wasn't like Felminia was making light of what he said, but she stared at Suimai with a skeptical expression. He decided to demonstrate its effect in the simplest way possible. He let go of his Mercury katana for the moment, then poked the signed document with his finger clad in mana. As he did, Felminia's chest was seized with pain. "Don't be HNGH. URRR. It works a little something like that. It's quite hard to endure the feeling of having your heart crushed, isn't it?" Suimai pulled his finger away from the document. When he did, Felminia was released from the pain that was crushing her heart, and began gasping for air as she voiced a complaint without any strength behind it. Aha. You didn't say anything about this. Whether or not I said anything, we have an agreement now. And I said you'd never speak of this, right? That's all there is to it. It's not all that complicated, really. All you have to do is keep your mouth shut. About what happened today, and about how I'm a magician. As long as you pretend to forget all that, no harm will come to you. Isn't that far more fair a deal than being sold or going to pick a fight with the Demon Lord? Suimai turned around as he spoke, and asked his last question over his shoulder. But no answer came. Finding that to be quite puzzling, he took a careful look at Felminia, who was hanging her head. HNGH. Hick. You're so mean. Wah. You are. It seemed every last bit of pride she had was gone. All Suimai could hear now was Felminia's sobbing. Did I kinda overdo it a little here? It seemed he'd done an exquisite job of breaking her. Used to facing off against magicians in his own world, he couldn't imagine taking anything other than a severe, hardline attitude against anyone who would come after him like she had. But he couldn't hide his bewilderment now. It wasn't just about Magica, there seemed to be an impassable gap between his world and this one when it came to maturity. Having realized that, could he really continue to back her into a corner? He momentarily considered it, but then relented. Suimai wasn't a cruel person, after all, and he was actually starting to panic a little. Well, that's how it is, so keep your promise, all right? It'd also be bad for my heart if I needlessly killed someone. He spoke with a far more casual tone than before. Sympathy had taken hold of him. He never thought she would cry like this. And since she continued to do nothing but sob, Suimai couldn't even tell if she was listening to him. He scratched his head in a fluster, and then deviated from his plans. Renovato, atque restituito. There. Restore, and then reconstruct. At the very least, he thought he could fix up her clothes, so he cast his restoration magicka for her. As the magicka circle rose up from the ground below the despondent Felminia, her robe was flawlessly restored. By the time the circle reached the top of her head, there was not a single hole, frayed thread, burn mark, or speck of dirt to be seen on it. And then, with nothing else to do, Suimai left Felminia alone and exited the garden. In the end, he settled everything by letting her go. Leaving the consequences for later, Suimai quickened his pace as he walked away. A fight between magicians wasn't the same as a death match. Really, it was quite rare for a magician to take the life of another magician. Certainly, mercy was never shown to those who arbitrarily intruded in the workshops of others, but aside from those cases, magicians inherently carried a mutual amount of respect for each other. They were brothers and sisters in their pursuits. Nowadays, magicka had fallen by the wayside thanks to science, and its development had come to a halt because of its decline. With things as they were, the life of each and every person who aspired to further magicka was important. So to ensure that the art known as magicka was never fully wiped from the face of the earth, there was an implicit understanding that magicians were not to needlessly kill other magicians, even if they used different styles. To that end, the contract Suimai had just used was employed quite frequently instead. In exchange for not killing someone, a magician could use the contract to ensure that no further harm could be inflicted upon them. And with a power like that, there was no real need to kill anyone in the first place. It kept magicians from killing themselves off, and helped maintain the ratio of those studying mysteries in the modern era. There were exceptions, of course, but it was worth bearing in mind that a duel between magicians was more of a competition than a fight. It was a chance to show off how well they understood the mysteries. In other words, it was a contest of the precision of their magicka, the strength and the complexity of their spells, their knowledge of theory, and any special characteristics they could use. In a way, it was a chance to study and learn from each other, mutually furthering the goals of their craft. Thinking about it like that, what about the fight just now? There was no magicka that made him unintentionally ooh and ah in admiration. There was nothing for him to linger on after his victory. No, only one thought came to mind on the subject. They're really too far behind, huh? He'd said something similar to Felminia earlier, but it was really bothering him now. From here on, after all, he had to live in this world. He was worried whether or not there were any mysteries here that would make his heart dance. With nothing to stimulate and inspire him, he, or any magician, for that matter, would become a fossil. To Suimai, who was pursuing his thesis, this was a huge setback. In any case, no intention to kill, right? The next thing he remembered was what Felminia said earlier. How could she say something like that after setting up that violent golem? But even so, she hadn't appeared to be lying when she said it. I guess I'll look into it a bit. Felminia had also said something about Suimai planning on harming the king. Thinking back on it, it didn't seem like an excuse. If he assumed that she was under some kind of misunderstanding, there was probably more to what was going on. Realizing that the curtain had yet to actually fall, Suimai grumbled to himself. Felminia was left completely defeated. Things had gone slightly out of order, but his original objective had been accomplished, and that reduced the potential risks for him. That being the case, it seemed like as good a time as any to make a move. And so Suimai quietly flipped open his black coat, and melted away into the matching darkness. A few days after the incident in the Garden of the White Wall, King Almedius Root Astal called Felminia Stingray to the audience chamber. The reason for this summons was naturally to receive an update on the status of Reiji's magic lessons straight from his instructor's mouth. He'd made inquiries from others, but their reports only ever said things like a bundle of talent, a magic genius, and the greatest in the world. Nothing but abstract praise. The important parts were all glossed over, and in short, All the king really knew about Reiji's magical ability was that he was talented. Since the king had the responsibility of sending him off, he wanted to know more in-depth details. So he'd called on Felmenia to report as his instructor. Her pure white robe quietly fluttered behind her as she knelt down before the king, and attentively reported on both Reiji and Mizuki's progress. According to her, Reiji's talent for magic was indeed extraordinary. His capacity for mana was over 10 times that of the castle's court mages, and while he still had some small shortcomings when it came to minute control of spells and mana, he was exceptionally quick on the uptake when it came to understanding magic. In regards to Mizuki Inu, though she wasn't on Reiji's level, she also held a fair amount of power. Her ability to understand and conceptualize magic seemed to have no limits, and she often left her peers wondering just how she was able to arrive at such notions. It was to the point where it was regrettable that she hadn't also received divine protection from the hero summoning. That is all, Your Majesty. The speed at which Reiji Dono and Mizuki Dono are learning magic is incredible. Someday, I am sure they will be comparable to the great mages from around the world. Injecting one last compliment, Felmenia brought her report to an end. The king then added on one more question as a light joke. Does it seem they will surpass even you? With Reiji Dono's power, perhaps. I see. That is reassuring. If Reiji Dono has that much talent with magic, then my concerns are likely just needless worry. I certainly hope so, Your Majesty. I was also surprised. They've only been introduced to magic for some 2 weeks now, and to already be a match for intermediate-level mages just goes to show that Reiji Dono was not chosen to be a hero for nothing. If you will allow me to say this as a single mage, my envy is irrepressible. Felmenia said that last part quietly. With her head bowed, the king couldn't see her expression clearly, but if she was jealous enough to admit it to him, he had no doubt that it was showing on her face, but there was no helping it. From what he had heard, Reiji was acquiring magical knowledge from her at a rate that could no longer be described by just the word exceptional. I am certain it is. However, if he did not have at least that much power, it is just as Your Majesty says, he would not be able to defeat the Demon Lord. Indeed. The king nodded back as their opinions lined up. Having heard everything he wanted to about the hero, he hung his hopes on Felmenia's efforts and hard work to continue training him. Court Mage Felmenia Stingray, your report has been received. There are still 3 days until Reiji Dono's departure, so make full use of that time. All is as you will, Your Majesty. Then, I will excuse myself here. After respectfully accepting the king's order, Felmenia bowed down and then turned to leave. However, the king had not dismissed her yet. He still had business with her, and he stopped her from going. Felmenia, I have something else that I would like to hear from you, huh? Oh, of course, Your Majesty. That young man. It's about Reiji Dono's good friend Suimai Dono. The king wanted to talk about Suimai Yakagi. Ever since Felmenia's previous report on him, the king had been worrying about Suimai almost as much as he had been about the hero Reiji. He was mostly concerned about the potential clash between Suimai and Felmenia, and he wanted to know if anything had come of it in the several days it had been since they'd talked on the matter. Suimai Dono, Your Majesty? Felmenia felt blindsided, and the dumbfounded look plastered on her face said it all. Her voice slightly cracked, but even so, the king pressed her on the matter. Indeed. After we last spoke, what kind of movements has that young man made? You have continued your surveillance, have you not? Regarding that. Felmenia? She was avoiding his gaze for some reason, and hesitated to speak as if it was something difficult to talk about. In utter contrast to her report about the hero, it was like she had completely lost her composure. It seemed that she had done something, otherwise she would be speaking loudly and with dignity as normal. Despite being quite young, no matter the situation and no matter the opponent, she never lost her composure. That was all out the window right now. What is the matter? Could it be that something happened? No, sire, that's, Even when he asked a second time, Felmenia could only answer evasively. When the king looked closely, he could see that she was sweating slightly. He then asked her a third time, this time in a strict tone. "Answer me, Felmenia. If you do not speak, we will be unable to progress, will we not? Tell me everything that has happened and everything you have witnessed. Conceal nothing." However, Felmenia would still not answer. Instead, she bowed down so deeply that she appeared to be rubbing her forehead on the floor. "Why, Your Majesty? Please, I beg of you. In regards to this matter, please allow me silence." "Are you saying you cannot speak of it?" "Yes, sire, though it is foolish of me, it is just as you say." "Why?" "The answer Your Majesty seeks is an undesirable state of affairs brought on by my lack of virtue. I cannot speak of it." Seeing her continue to behave so unlike herself, the king unintentionally groaned. Prostrating herself, she refused to speak of the matter. She was being unusually obstinate. The question was why she was going to such great lengths to conceal what had happened, but the answer was obvious enough. After being told not to do something, she'd naturally be reluctant to admit it if she'd defied that order. Even if she tried to skirt the issue, one wrong word might reveal her, and then she would be punished accordingly for defying the king. Then was this silence some form of self-defense against that punishment? If that was the case, she'd already given herself away. "I told you that you mustn't act, did I not, Felmenia? And it seems you've done something to Sui Dono after all. Am I wrong?" As the king raised his voice, Felmenia's shoulders trembled like a small animal that had been discovered by a predator. Seeing her like that, it appeared she truly feared being found out and reprimanded. The fact that she was unable to expect such a thing despite her wisdom was both unexpected and disappointing, but no matter how much she trembled, responsibility was responsibility. But before all else, he actually needed to know what was going on, and that would mean getting the details out of her. "Speak. Before I pass down your punishment, I must hear what you have to say. Until then, nothing can begin." Please, Your Majesty. I beg of you. I beg for your mercy. There is no need to be so obstinate. I already expected you to disobey my orders. Resign yourself and hold nothing back." "Why, Your Majesty? I have had enough of this, Felm?" When he looked closely, the king saw that this dignified young woman had tears coming from the corners of her eyes. Just how long had it been since he last saw her cry? It must have been when she was still a small child, the night she'd visited the castle for the first time for an evening party and had gotten separated from her parents, the Countess and Earl Stingray. This was most perplexing. "Why will you not speak?" Felmenia would not answer. All she would do was bow her head down. King Almadius took a long, silent moment to think to himself. Just why wouldn't she speak? Why was she being so obstinate over this? The answer to those questions didn't come to him, but he eventually thought of a plan and changed his line of questioning. "Felmenia. From here, I shall ask you questions. But Your Majesty. Listen to me, Felmenia. If the answer to my question is correct, then remain silent as you are now in response. If it is incorrect, then just shake your head. Understood?" The king made himself quite clear, and Felmenia kept silent without objecting. He then proceeded to pose the questions that had come to him, one at a time. "Within the last few days, did you take some sort of action against Sui Dono?" Silence. Thus, a hit. But he had expected that much. This wasn't news to him. Was it a verbal warning? This time, Felmenia shook her head. "Did you use force?" Another hit, though it was likely no more than overawing him as a punishment. Felmenia should have known full well not to do anything more than that. He didn't think it was possible, but he still had to ask. "At the time, did you injure Sui Dono?" The king was worried he may have phrased that a little strongly, but Felmenia adamantly shook her head. With that, one more question came to mind. "Wait, did you try to injure him?" In response to Felmenia's silence, The king was also stunned into silence, known full well not to do anything more than that. He didn't think it was possible, but he still had to ask. At the time, did you injure Swimai Dono? The king was worried he may have phrased that a little strongly, but Felmenia adamantly shook her head. With that, one more question came to mind. Wait, did you try to injure him? In response to Felmenia's silence, the king was also stunned into silence for a time. This was far too surprising. Not the fact that Felmenia had actually used force, but that she, despite being considered the most prominent mage in the entire country, had failed to injure Swimai when that's what she'd had the express intent of doing. That was what shocked him. Just what did it mean? Had the boy who was not given the divine protection from the hero summoning, a mere mage who had no strength imparted on him by the goddess or the elements, truly walked away unscathed from an encounter with the white flame? While listening to the sound of his own gulping, the king resolved himself and asked one more question. Then let me ask you this, Felmenia. Were you defeated? Affirmative silence. There was nothing more to doubt. Felmenia had acted on her own, disobeying the king's order and confronting Swimai, and as a result, she had tasted a crushing defeat. And at that time, Swimai Dono took hold of some kind of weakness of yours. And because of that, you were unable to say anything to me. Is that correct? A hit. As expected, Felmenia couldn't speak freely on the matter because of some sort of weakness, despite the fact that she could not be seen or heard by the one exploiting that weakness at the moment. The king had his doubts as to why she was honoring whatever arrangement she had with Swimai, but Felmenia, and also the one who laid her low, Swimai, were both people walking the dark, winding path of magic. For the king who had only dabbled in the magic arts, it was difficult for him to comprehend what kind of agreement the two of them may have come to. Hic. Your Majesty, my deepest apologies. In addition to going against your orders, I am being disloyal only to protect myself. I, Felmenia Stingray, shall accept any punishment that you deem appropriate. It is fine. You have already received your punishment from Swimai Dono, have you not? There is no point in lashing the dead. I have no punishment to bestow on you. Your Majesty. Repenting for her mistakes, Felmenia's tears flowed freely and she became excessively despondent. For her to be in such low spirits was likely because her fight against Swimai had been that devastating. In that case, the king could see that she'd already been punished enough. If the situation had rendered her so humbled, her self-conceit and pride were likely no longer an issue, and that was a relief to him, honestly. But it wasn't all good news. One worry quickly replaced another. Felmenia. I cannot leave this matter unaddressed. After this, I am thinking of summoning Swimai Dono to the audience chamber. Your Majesty, calling Swimai Dono here. But why? As Felmenia raised her head in bewilderment, the king answered her without holding anything back. Is it not obvious? Since I cannot hear it from you, I shall ask Swimai Dono. Besides, there is the matter of the summoning as well as your weakness. I ought to diffuse any potential discord between that man and us. You mustn't, Your Majesty. Swimai Dono is not that kind of halfer, gwa. When she tried to object, Felmenia was strangely afflicted. Suddenly, right in the middle of her sentence, a shriek came from her mouth and she was grasping at a terrible pain in her chest. Felmenia? What happened? Felmenia. At this strange, sudden occurrence, the king reflexively rose to his feet. Felmenia's fit was that alarming. But the pain that rendered her writhing on the ground did not seem to last for long. In a few moments, her screaming stopped and she righted her posture. Ha. I apologize for showing such a disgraceful display before. Ahem. Just what is the matter? Is it some sort of sickness? No. She denied that much, but the king knew this was no coincidence. A veritable fountain of cold sweat was running down her beautiful, wise face. She was as pale as a corpse. It was only reasonable to assume the cause was illness, but the king had never heard of her suffering from any such thing. The king reviewed the events in his head. Moments ago, Felmenia had been on the floor grasping at her chest, seemingly at her heart. And she was afflicted with this pain suddenly. Objecting to the king's idea, she had started to say something about Swimai, the very boy she'd refused to talk about otherwise. It was moments after mentioning his name that she began screaming. Following that logic, could it be that pain is the weakness? Is it magic? Felmenia would not answer. No, because of her weakness, she likely could not answer. The king could only barely see her downcast face, but it was a vortex of bitter feelings. It was part self-condemnation and part remorse. Seeing her in that state, the king had nothing more to ask of her. Understood, Felmenia, you may leave everything to me. Your Majesty. As I said before, I shall call Swimai Dono here. But. It is fine. I shall take all responsibility. You shall. And from there, King Almadia sent a messenger to retrieve the magician who had cursed one of his mages. Night had fallen since the king concluded his business with Felmenia. He sat in the audience chamber of Castle Camellia, and was eventually greeted by the sound of the door opening. The one who entered was none other than Swimai Yakagi. He was a good friend of Reiji's, and according to Felmenia, a mage from the other world. At first glance, this young man looked completely plain. He bowed at the door, and then approached the king with an unhurried gait. The atmosphere around him was just the same as it had been the first time he visited the audience chamber, but he was dressed differently this time. His new monochrome outfit gave him a certain sense of refinement. Perhaps because he was not used to such situations, Swimai knelt down before the king in a somewhat clumsy manner. At your messenger's request, I have come to see your Majesty. I must apologize for summoning you so late into the night. Forgive me for saying so after you have already been so courteous, but today it will only be the two of us here. Please be at ease. Would that be all right, Swimai Dono? Yes, your Majesty. After a long pause, Swimai consented and raised his face. His expression was still a little stiff. Seeing him like that, the king deferred moving on to the main topic and inquired about his clothing instead. I am unfamiliar with that outfit. Just what is it? It's clothing that I brought from my home world. It was inside the bag that I had on hand, and part of the few personal belongings I was able to bring here. It has a different sense of refinement from the clothing the hero wears. In our world, this clothing would be part of what is considered to be full dress. It's more appropriate for a place like this. Hearing Swimai's words, the king passed his gaze over Swimai's outfit again. The black cloth had not one wrinkle in it. The piece of cloth fastened around his neck that hung down like a sword was a nice contrast on top of the stark white shirt he wore underneath it. And paired together with the black trousers he was wearing, the whole ensemble had an indescribable sense of refinement. I see. It suits you well. Thank you very much, Your Majesty. As Swimai responded, though still kneeling, he deftly smoothed down his coat, straightened his sleeves, and corrected his posture. In that brief moment, it seemed as though the awkwardness had vanished. But Swimai suddenly bowed down his head when he seemed to recall something. Though it is quite overdue, Your Majesty, I apologize for making such an unsightly scene the other day. Swimai humbly offered an apology for what had happened on the day they met. When Swimai had heard he could not return home straight from the king's mouth, though it was a completely natural reaction, Swimai had completely lost sight of himself. The moment he'd heard those words, he rudely stood up and started shouting. Don't fuck with me. I can't believe it. If you can't return us, then you shouldn't have summoned us. Something to that effect. He'd completely unloaded on the king. His insolent behavior had offended and enraged the audience who witnessed it, but such was the situation. With the king's mediation, everything had calmed down since, but he never thought that he would receive an apology after the fact. Ah, yes, that. It's quite fine. Your feelings were justified. After arbitrarily summoning you three to this world, we made things worse and said that you could not return. Truly, there is no reason you should have to apologize. I would have you raise your head. Then, as the king frankly declared that no offense had been taken at his outburst, Swimai obliged and once more raised his head. From his expression, the king could see that regardless of who was at fault during the commotion on that day, Swimai was concerned about it. There was still a sense of awkwardness about him. But with that out of the way, Swimai cut to the chase. You said that you had something to discuss with me, Your Majesty? Indeed. There is something that I must know, Swimai Dono. Your Majesty. What the king heard now was a troubled voice. Was this bewildered face and furrowed brow a glimpse into who this young man really was? It is about Felmenia, Swimai Dono. There is something that I would like to hear from you. Felmenia-san, is it? If I remember correctly, I have heard she is the one who has been instructing Reiji and Mizuki in magic. But what of her, Your Majesty? She has told me before that she has seen you outside of your room and loitering around the castle. As Swimai shamelessly claimed that Felmenia was someone he was only casually acquainted with, the king confronted him with what he'd heard about his behavior. Swimai then smiled with a weak and bitter expression like he'd been embarrassed somehow. Ha. I was under the impression that I was free to look around the inside of the castle, so I have been taking walks to keep myself occupied. Have I caused some sort of inconvenience? No, that's not a problem.